devotees. Krishna Dharma, I'm in England, and along with Damodar Prabhu in Australia and Devamada Prabhu in America, we are members of a small lobby group which has been communicating with the GBC of late with a view to assisting them to restore their credibility. We've been making certain suggestions to them and speaking a little bit with the Executive Committee in that regard. And this effort commenced 6 months ago in March, as some of you will know, when we sent them a letter, which I shall mention a bit more in a moment. But the reason we began this this effort was because we perceived that the credibility of the GBC had been severely eroded. And of course, recent events, as many of you will be only too well aware, with the child abuse exposures, etc., have contributed greatly to that. But it's not just that, it stretches back over many decades. The leadership failures which we've witnessed, going back to, say, the zonal acharyas, their fall downs, and the lack of transparency around that, which was perceived as cover-ups, which I remember. I joined in 1979. I remember that only too well. And the perceived nepotism among the members of the GBC, the expedient morality, where they, have done U-turns on issues, apparently succumbing to political pressure, and the abuse of power in many instances, which has led to the alienation of many of their god siblings, the fall downs of the GBC approved gurus, which has destroyed the faith of so many devotees, the misuse of funds for personal opulence. The sannyas ashram has become a bit of a laughing stock in ISKCON, with their private houses and so many different things being waited on hand and foot. Of course, not all of them, but there's a lot of it about. And their general non-responsiveness. When anyone tries to approach them for anything, it's very difficult to get any kind of response back from them. So all these different things have contributed to, and of course, most recently, as I mentioned in the beginning, the child abuse, and that really brought everything to a head, and that kind of immobilized us into, let's try and do something. Someone's got to try it, so let us try. So that's what inspired us to form our little group. And the first thing we did was we wrote a letter which asked them, the GBC, if they would stand down and not, just abandon ship and then leave it sort of like without any leadership, but to a review. We suggested that they stand down and that there be a review of the GBC members individually, and then they could come back into post if everything was fine. And that review would be conducted by an external body, perhaps the Org Dave, maybe the SABHA, of which I'm a member, by the way, or some other ad hoc body, something like the 50-man committee of the 80s. Some of you may remember that, the mid-80s. So something like that, that would review the situation and see what can be done, to improve it, and to rebuild the trust. So the letter was written back in March, and I personally then started to speak to devotees to see if they would like to sign that. We were just asking, well, do you agree with this? What do you think? Would you like to sign this letter? And we did get around 50 signatures, but my experience there was that so many senior devotees said to me that you're wasting your time. The GBC are never going to change. They're just entrenched in their mood of not being, accountable, of not being transparent, of not caring. I mean, this was really the response I got from so many, and some of them, they said, well, we've attempted this in the past ourselves. We were and we gave up in despair, and you'll do the same thing. They predicted. So yeah, they on the plea of like it being a waste of time, they didn't sign. And others were fearful of recriminations, and that shocked me. They were saying, well, we agree with you. Yeah, there certainly needs to be something done, but we're not going to sign that letter because then we'll be chucked out of ISKCON. And so there was quite a bit of that, quite a bit of fear. So yeah, a lot of people didn't sign, but we did manage to get 50 or so. And the letter was submitted towards the end of March, and it came to the attention of the GBC just before Ram Navami, and I heard from an insider that their initial response was, what's this all about? Who do these guys think they are? Largely, that was the response. They wanted to make a robust reply to us. But this devotee, he said that it was pointed out that tomorrow is Ram Navami, and how would Lord Ram respond to such a petition from the citizens? And they thought, yeah, well, maybe you're right. Okay, well, let the EC meet with them and see what their problem is. So this is basically what happened. The Executive Committee of the GBC, they met with us. And they said, well, yeah, could you kind of give us a bit more detail of what are your concerns? So we did that, and they said, right, well, we'll relay these to the GBC body, and you'll be hearing back from them in due course of time. So we thought, great, this is better than we expected. It was just like a week after we'd sent the letter. However, the anticipated response from the GBC body has never actually materialized. What we have had is some further meetings with not the entire EC. We only had one of those, but with one member in particular who showed some sympathy and has been saying that yes, there is some concern among other GBC members, and that they do want to do something to address this problem, this lack of trust, this lack of credibility, the lack of accountability. One of the senior devotees I spoke to when I was trying to get the letter signed, he was on the GBC himself quite a few years, and I think he's still involved as an emeritus. And he said that he compared it to being on a roller coaster without any guide rails. He said the situation now with the GBC not having any accountability at all is something like that. You're careering down this roller coaster, and there's nothing to stop you from flying off the rails at any moment. So I thought that was a pretty good analogy. So yeah, but there are these concerns among the other GBCs, we were told by this one EC member, but the problem is the wheels turn slowly, and it's not going to be quick that we're going to get anything to, actually to change. And actually this is true. I know from my own knowledge of the GBC workings and what's going on that they are sinking under the weight of their own bureaucracy, practically speaking. They've got 30 or 40 proposals backed up and awaiting review. Even those which are supposed to be acted on immediately, which are coming from their advisory bodies, are being left, and for a couple of years even they're not being looked at. And I heard from the EC how they've done a work study of the GBC and concluded that they spend over 60% of their time dealing with crises. So they don't really have any time for proactive work of the kind that we're trying to encourage them to undertake. So yeah, we've not heard anything. One other thing that we did a survey of the ISKCON membership, which reached 800 devotees, a sample of 800. We tried to take it further, but it was blocked actually by the GBC's communication minister, who stopped us from putting it on Dandavats and the ISKCON news. So it didn't really go mainstream because he said, oh, it was one-sided, it was biased, but I mean, it was just a simple survey, and they could answer it either way. Yes, we're really happy with what the GBC are doing right now, or no, we have concerns and these are what they are. So but that survey, it was overwhelmingly weighted towards being concerned. You know, that the devotees were like 80% of them were strongly saying there's no accountability, there's no transparency, there's no integrity. You know, and these weren't just malcontents. These were devotees who've been practicing for many years. They're sadhakas, and that, you know, they were sufficiently concerned. They cared enough that they would fill out the survey. I mean, a lot of people I asked to fill out the survey, they gave me a similar response to those I approached to sign the letter. Well, I'm not going to waste my time with that. That's not going to change anything. No one's going to take any notice of that. Sadly, they were right in one way, because you know, I've told the EC we've got this survey, we can show you it, and they've not shown any interest. We've not had any discussions about that. You know, which is very disappointing. I mean, to be fair, the EC member who's been communicating with us did ask me to send him the results, which I did 4 months ago, but I haven't heard anything since. So I guess the wheels are still grinding and slowly around. So yeah, basically that's the state of affairs right now. We're still hanging in there. We're waiting. We've been told that they'll be back in touch with us, but to be honest with you, we're starting to get a little bit despairing of anything ever actually happening there. So I'd like to hand over now to Damodar Prabhu, who's going to add a bit to that. Hare Krishna.
Thanks, Krishna Dhamma Prabhu. I mean, people may think that we're overstating the problem. I have to say, I have a deep love for ISKCON, having been involved for several decades. ISKCON, as founded by Srila Prabhupada, is truly miraculous. Even now, in its wounded condition, it's spreading like wildfire. Temples are opening. People are joining and getting involved. The thing is, the society is not immune. And we can see that several times the Krishna consciousness movement over the centuries since Lord Chaitanya became expanded and then contracted. The splintering of Gaudiya Math underneath, you know, after Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur left, prior to his departure, it had been a unified movement. That's a clear sign. And Srila Prabhupada famously said, personal ambition is the poison. This is the thing that can undo the Krishna consciousness movement. What Prabhupada started and offered to the world was a potent revolutionary movement meant for transforming the world. That's what I joined. That's what so many devotees joined. And the number of faithful souls who engage with what Prabhupada offered and continue to engage and sacrifice lives. One of the biggest tragedies is, where are all those souls now? If we consider the number of people whose faith was awakened by Prabhupada and thought to commit, and where are they now? And what proportion of them feel disaffected by the nature of the society's leadership today? Certainly that survey that Krishna Dhamma Prabhu referenced gives some indication of just how disillusioned devotees are. It's a big worry if, despite all this evidence, the current leadership doesn't even recognize that this warrants remedy, the re-engagement of those souls or the re-establishing of leadership credibility. Srila Prabhupada also said famously, at least maintain what I've given you. I wonder if we thought that just, referred to buildings and stuff, and not actually this faithful cohort of great souls who were committed to serving the movement. Tragically, the preoccupation of the society's leaders today seems to be about attendance at their programs. If the attendance at their programs, that they're personally delivering is substantive, what's the issue? And maybe it is about building up a personal following. So I'm sort of linking that back to this idea of personal ambition potentially being a poison. Is there any evidence of a strategy beyond that? A strategy for how Krishna consciousness will reach all the peoples of the world? Or even how we'll successfully inculcate Krishna consciousness in the next generation? This, to me, is one of the most tragic areas of leadership neglect. That the second generation has not only been given a poor impression of Krishna consciousness, but often relentlessly preyed upon, fed to the wolves. What does that say about the health of any society where it doesn't actually invest in that next generation? You know, here are three of us who won't abandon Srila Prabhupada's movement, and towards that very end have attempted to constructively dialogue with the institution's leaders. Of course, it's disappointing that despite the sincere recent effort to reach and dialogue, it's largely been met with arrogance and indifference. The letter that we sent was respectful. The response we received indicated that the mindset of the leadership is about as far away from the principle of Trinadapi Sanicena and servant leadership as one could imagine. Evidently, the status quo, though falling short of the needs and expectations of most members, suits the current leadership just fine. No sense of urgency to address things, no sense of alarm. In the next 10 or 15 years, most of them will be in their samadhis, and the mantle will have been passed on. We'd hoped that there might have been an opportunity to dialogue around this passing on of the baton of the mantle. Apparently that was not a shared vision with the leaders. Quite what they think they can achieve without the faith and backing of the society's broad membership is beyond us. Will they ever summon the insight, humility, and courage to engage with the many thoughtful people Prabhupada has drawn to the movement? We can only pray that that is something that happens soon. I'll pass to Deva Madhava Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhus, for what you shared. I'm reminded the relief that I felt myself over the last few months in simply being able to dialogue about these things and not feeling alone in my own thoughts about the incongruity with the movement that Srila Prabhupada describes in his books and embodies in his own behavior, what is heralded by admirable devotees who teach and share the philosophy, and then what the actual experience is on the ground for many of us. Having started a small center in North America about 12 years ago, I've been on the sort of front lines of seeing that tension between what is advertised and what has actualized, and the disappointment that creates in devotees. And I see still, despite the conditions that were described well by you, Prabhus, still a very profound opportunity in this last 10 years or so before the founding followers, the first generation of those who took Prabhupada's call to heart, before those founding followers depart, there's still this very precious 10-year window of an opportunity to close some of these gaps and to make amends. And that really lies with this first generation. And so as a next generation, as somebody of the future and thinking hundreds of years, hopefully centuries and millennia into the future, how Mahaprabhu's movement will be carried forward, how will Prabhupada's legacy be remembered and felt. This founding follower generation has such an opportunity to follow the footsteps of Parikshit Maharaj, follow the footsteps of Chitraketu, as we pointed to in our first letter, and take rise to the occasion by stepping down, by admitting a collective shortfall, and in doing so create a space that allows for the next generation to step in a profound way, seeing that active servant leadership in its highest expression, taking the responsibility, whatever the details are or aren't about who failed and who didn't, the willingness of great leaders to say that it was ultimately my responsibility to see that this happened, and because it didn't, I take all reaction for that, for the sake of my citizens, for the sake of my followers. This is the kind of brave step down that we need to see. And if it's not seen, then my generation will be left holding the bag. And I will have to answer 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, when devotees are long gone. I will have to answer for how we, as a community, followed and accepted unacceptable behavior, things that were never apologized for appropriately, things that were never acknowledged appropriately. My generation and those going forward will have to answer for that, ultimately to Prabhupada and to Krishna, those thoughtful souls that would come into our movement and see some potential there for their own upliftment, but be very rightly apprehensive because of these incongruities in the fabric of the society. So when I look at the condition of things myself, I don't have any animosity for how things have come to this point that they are. My own understanding of it is that it's an expression of unresolved grief. This early generation that came after Srila Prabhupada, they did not have, and in some ways did not give themselves the time to mourn the passing of someone like Srila Prabhupada, who created an inconceivable presence in their life and then seemingly left an inconceivable hole almost as quickly as that glorious presence had came. And the trauma of that was not given its space, was not given its time, and young men and young women who were still budding in their own capacities were suddenly out of naivety, but also sincerity, thinking that they also had to be that powerful a personality as Srila Prabhupada. And the awkwardnesses that have played out since then, I personally see stemming back to that. So with no animosity, with no grudge, I fold my hands and ask any senior that's watching to take seriously your responsibility, to take responsibility for the shortcomings of the past, so that a healthy present and an exciting future are actually possible, rather than having to live out the trauma of these first 50 years for the next 50 to 100 years. Those that are watching the video that feel moved by some of the things being shared, that are excited that such conversations are happening, we did send a second letter also to the GBC, which outlined some, you could say, more practical points to implement if they're not willing to resign in review. As Krishna Dharma Prabhu mentioned at the beginning, then please see to it in your present position that these 4 elements are implemented. Those 4 elements are listed in the comment, or rather in the description section of this video. And what they amount to are mechanisms for transparency and accountability, which Srila Prabhupada's direction of management clearly indicates he wanted in the leadership of the society, both locally and at the GBC level. And that lack of transparency and accountability is in clear violation of Prabhupada's own wishes, which he laid out in the direction of management. Ironically, the direction of management was never implemented when Prabhupada was here. We can appreciate why also, because who would want to give deference to a political structure when you have the opportunity to hear from Srila Prabhupada personally? So his own presence got in the way of that implementation on some level, and we can appreciate why. But we also can appreciate now why Srila Prabhupada laid out so clearly the direction of management, and the principles there must be implemented by us if we really want to say that we're followers of Prabhupada. The GBC may be willing to do that. They may also not be willing to do that. So any devotee who's watching and hoping to feel some inspiration for action and initiative to create some meaningful change, consider how you can bring these points, these principles, into your local yatra. Because Prabhupada's own conception of ISKCON was based in the power of local yatra. It wasn't actually at the GBC level. He didn't have much faith in bureaucracy, as anybody can see in his teachings, but especially in his writings to his disciples. I'll point you to a famous letter to Karandar Prabhu in December of '72. If you want to see Prabhupada's own taste for heavy-handed bureaucracy and centralization, is very little. So Prabhupada had great faith in local yatras. And if you, in your place where you serve, can start to bring in these principles of accountability within the local temple community, bringing them out of the culture of cronyism and nepotism that everything has survived on for so long, away from the who you know and who you don't know dynamics as to how the decisions are made in a community and into these structures of accountability, there's no better way to create a healthy atmosphere of trust and support that every thoughtful person needs to be able to give their heart to the Krishna consciousness movement. So we invite devotees to say something in the comments, use this video as a kind of informal petition to say your piece and to share your solidarity, if you feel it, around the things that we've shared today, and give us your well wishes that we may be able to continue to try to address these points to those that have the most capacity to make the change. Although we all have some capacity, it is true, Yad Yada Charati Shrestha, the Vedic paradigm does not shy away from hierarchy. Those at the top have the most power and the most capacity to make the most profound change, but it doesn't mean that we here from where we sit can do nothing. So please make your comments known and felt. And I'll end by mentioning that Krishna Dharma Prabhu pointed out 50 signatures on the original letter. We were very careful in selecting those signatures as people who had position and service within the society formally. And I think that's an important point. It wasn't whatever 50 devotees we were able to bring together, but in fact, people like Krishna Dharma Prabhu who are on the SABHA, myself as a temple president, several other temple presidents, some GBC deputies, people with meaningful service in the society. Those were the devotees that we had sign on, names that the GBC themselves would find harder to ignore, so to speak, because they know that these are committed members, not people from the sidelines, armchair philosophers of sorts, but people who are in their everyday life invested in Srila Prabhupada's mission. So we thank you so much, devotees, for your kind time and attention. If you've stayed with us this far, Prabhus, is there anything else that you'd like to share?
Yeah, just briefly that I really think I appreciated what you both said, and especially the point about the founding followers of Prabhupada now, having to really show us the way. And I think that's such an important point, because once they pass on in the next 20, 30 years, they'll all be gone. It's, even further confusion is going to arise. I can see that happening. Different, they've created this whole system where there's now big gurus and the mega gurus and everything, and it could very easily factionalize and become lots of different parties and groups, unless the GBC now shows us the way forward, so we can stick together and have faith in them as a body, and remain united in our diversity. And I really think it's important that the current members do that. And I recently was listening to Prabhupada Memories, and one of the old zonal acharyas who's now left his body was saying how, Hamsaduda, I can say his name, was talking to Prabhupada, and he was saying to him that the GBC should only meet for 2 or 3 hours a year, maximum 4. And and he was saying, once he was reviewing the resolutions, and he looked at them and he went through them quickly and said, so why are you not discussing how we can improve the purity of our chanting? And the thing is that Prabhupada was really wanting them to be focused on spirituality, not so much on micromanagement, passing laws, which really does seem to take up most of their time these days. He spoke about boiling the milk, that the GBC should be going around and helping devotees to discuss the books and see them from different lights. He wrote many letters like this, that the GBC should be like sannyasis, traveling and preaching, and leaving local centers to run their own shows, like David Madhav Prabhu was saying. He was very big on local autonomy, and not heavy-handed management. The GBC have the power, they're the ultimate managerial authority, they have the veto if they need it. But what he really wanted them to do was to be trainers and teachers, coaches, going around like that. And the very fact that they're constantly in crisis it's a symptom of a lack of proactivity. If you're not proactive, you end up reactive, and you're just struggling all the time, dealing with one crisis after another. And that's what's happening. And the proactivity is get out there, get among the devotees. sit down with them, discuss the philosophy. And, you know, this is what Prabhupada wanted, the milk boiling program. So I think it's critical that the GBC now really do accept that this is the time for a root and branch review. And, you know, I know they're talking about a mission statement. They want to get their own mission statement together. Well, it's really well past time that happened. You know, defining the extent of their remit. What are they supposed to be doing? Where are they supposed to be leading us to? Are they succeeding? Are we heading in the right direction? Are we united around Prabhupada as our founder Acharya? All these different questions really need to be answered by them. And if they don't do it soon, we're going to struggle, you know, into the future. I can see that. Thank you.
I might just add one other final thought. You referenced the Karandhar letter 72. Srila Prabhupada talks about independently thoughtful. So this idea that we don't want automatons that are only compliant with the bidding of some higher authority. We actually want people who are capable of thinking. So one of my measures in my field of really good leadership development is how comfortable a leader is with mature people around them who have their own points of view and are, you know, afraid of stating them and so on. If a leader only really values obedient and compliant people, that's obviously going to restrict the maturity of the society. And so, yeah, I think we need to think long and carefully about why so many of the long-serving devotees are the ones who feel left out, excluded, disenchanted, or that their voice carries no weight. This, to me, should be ringing alarm bells.
Thank you, Prabhus, again, for your time and diligence with this. As a younger person, again, with these tensions internally, sometimes I wonder if I'm not just some rebellious upstart who has typical adolescent issues with authority, but there's actually a deep reassurance knowing that mature devotees like yourself also recognize these things as inconsistencies in the culture of our movement that, if adjusted and amended, would do wonders to be able to allow all of us to share Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada's grace in a much more profound way. So again, thank you to the devotees who've kindly stayed with us this far. Please, if you feel moved at all, say something in the comments, express yourself in a respectful way, so that even in an informal capacity, we're creating a conversation across Srila Prabhupada's family around these things so that they become more and more obvious to each of us. And in our own ways, in our own personal lives and dealings, we can embody those principles of integrity that we know he wanted. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Samaveda Bhakti.